Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, your weekly libertarian podcast from the magazine Free Minds and Free Markets. I hope everyone had a lovely Christmas, Kwanzaa, Saturnalia, etc. I am Matt Welch, joined by Nick Gillespie, Peter Suderman, and Katherine Mangu-Ward. Hi, everybody.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt.
Happy holidays.
Ooh, I should have gone with holiday howdy. I regret everything.
We can start over again. You're the boss.
No.
Krampus, Kwanzaa.
Yeah. So anyways, it's the last week of the year here on planet Earth, which is an excellent time to look backward at just what the hell happened over the last 51 weeks. Reason magazine has always had, shall we say, an alternative viewpoint from which to assess the world around us. The first words in the first issue of the magazine 55 years ago, written by the immortal Lanny Friedlander, were as follows. Introducing Reason, we accept the responsibility that others have defaulted on. We've all been striving to meet that lofty standard ever since, but with your generous help, we do our level best. So, in the Friedlander spirit, we're going to take a look back in this special episode and come up with some undercovered stories of 2023. Oftentimes, national politics, particularly of the presidential variety, is the squirrel to the attention span of our dog-like media, and the media's most avid consumers as well. But what is happening just off camera is our question of the day. So we're going to cover in this discussion politics, science, and culture. But first, Katherine, let's get into politics, arena. I know that fills you with that special feeling. What is a big undercovered political or governance story of 2023?
So listen, this story has been covered, but it basically definitionally
this is starting off very well.
Can't be covered enough, which is the debt. Like we
Here's
just owe so much money. The debt, the national debt. And it's $33 trillion.
Speaking of responsibilities that others have defaulted on.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's defaulted
see what you
yet.
did there.
They're paying the interest.
I think you've defaulted on not interrupting the boss. Go on, Katherine.
We are paying that interest now, but the interest payments on the debt are pretty soon going to cost more than the budget of the entire military. And there's no particular reason to think that that is going to go better unless Congress decides to do something different. And there's no particular reason to think Congress is going to do anything different. It's the same size as the nation's economy, basically. It's so big. It's so much money. It's all of the debt in the world. And I just don't know how to cover it more. Because all it is really just saying the big number over and over and hoping that eventually it just scares the bejesus out of someone with some power. I don't know if that's going to happen, though.
Peter, I remember you wrote a classic feature about the Congressional Budget Office back in the day, back when people paid attention to it. It's my sort of anecdotal impression that people no longer pay attention to the fiscal death porn of the long-term fiscal outlook of the CBO. Is my impression correct, or what's going on there? Did they change? Did they tweak the knobs at all in the way that they present this horror information to the rest of us?
So one way to think about your question is there any coverage of the Congressional Budget Office long-term budget outlook reports? Yes, there is. Every year they release these reports, and every year there is coverage in the type of publication that writes about this sort of thing. We write about this stuff at Reason. It's covered in The Hill, sometimes in Politico. You might even get a New York Times article or two. At the same time, people aren't. So it's not that no one is aware of it at all. But this has been going on for so long now. I mean, this is the stuff that I started writing about when I started at Reason in 2009. And every year they say basically the same thing. Boy, we've got a lot of debt. We're going to have to make some really big changes in order to deal with this. If we don't make some big changes, we risk a debt crisis. The sooner we make those changes, the better. Well, it's not sooner anymore. It's later. And so now those changes are going to have to be bigger. And we've also been hearing this for 15 years or more. And people are just like, well, I guess that's just the way things are, right? It's like it's become, I guess things are a little, it's become it's like a house you've lived in, and like, you know what? Sometimes the bathtub just leaks, and it always leaks, and we're never going to fix it. And we're never going to fix it. There's no plan to fix it.
Why would you attack my bathtub specifically like that?
Yeah. By the way, if you don't fix that bathtub, eventually it's going to fall through into the cellar or the first floor.
And that, my friends, is why I do not own my house.
Yeah.
It also will fall through all the way down to red china. Nick,
Yeah.
I remember there was a book that came out around 2011.
I deny that.
In which a catchphrase wasn't what happened, but rather we are out of money. And since then, we've been printing money so much more. One of the critiques that you have made eloquently over the years is that the preponderance of economic thinking on gigantic debt burdens is that it dampens growth.
Right.
And yet I look around. Nick Gillespie and the United States seems to be growing pretty well compared to the rest of the so-called free world. Is that part of the problem? We're just like too successful to show that having a gigantor debt pile is bad for us.
Well, actually, relative to earlier eras, we are growing much slower, half as fast. So a big difference, and a lot of, the kind of consensus among economists is that, carrying the amount of debt that we're carrying reduces average growth in GDP by, from 3% to 2%. We've actually been averaging below 2% for the 21st century. And that's a problem. It's not zero growth, and obviously there's volatility and all of that too. But I think the biggest problem, and this goes back to something Peter was touching on, is that the mental model we have for why deficits are bad no longer really seems to explain anything. And it used to be that big debt was bad because it caused a spike in it caused inflation and/or it caused a hike in interest rates. And we managed to escape those for the most part in the 21st century in a way that a lot of economists and people who are debt hawks, regardless of being liberal or conservative or whatever, we're saying we're going to get massive increases in inflation. We're going to get massive because we're printing so much money to buy so much government that we're not taxing for. Or we're going to get massive increases in interest rates. And interest rates now, even as they've gone up in the past year or so, are so far below what they were that many of us remember in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s. But the real problem is that long-term economic growth, because it really does compound, both positively and negatively, and we're much less wealthy than we would be otherwise. But that is a harder story to sell, certainly, than, the idea that we have stagflation. Dick Cheney, who everybody is welcome to forget ever existed. I think he's still alive. He's absorbing people's life force like some kind of shitty Marvel supervillain as he bestrides the Wild West or whatever. But he said Reagan proved deficits don't matter. And everybody was like, you know what? I don't think that's right. I don't think Reagan proved that. I don't think Dick Cheney is a good actor or anything, but let's go with that. Because that means we don't have to do anything other than argue for how much more debt finance government my team is going to give you, the pliant voter.
Yeah, it's just been extremely awesomely convenient for everyone to pretend like this isn't a big deal and to pretend like each incremental step toward it becoming a big deal is also not a big deal, like the downgradings by the ratings agencies, right? Which is like, well, it's just who even knows? Those guys are like, they're probably like the Armageddon clock. It's always a minute to midnight, but we always pull it out in the end. And I think there is some point where like our sense of ourselves as these like scrappy people who are gonna, they're gonna pull off the caper and we're just gonna have infinite debt and it's gonna work out fine and we're gonna emerge triumphant. I don't think so.
And it is a relative story, right? I mean, Argentina is dollarizing. Right. They're not francizing or euroizing or anything like that. So however shitty our money supply is and whatever negative effects it's having, it's, probably better than doing anything else.
Speaking of Argentina, Javier Milei, in his inauguration speech,
I think it's been underreported, Matt, that he has good hair and wears leather jackets, but
I don't think so, honestly.
I don't know about you. I can't get enough of that reporting.
Anyways, his inauguration speech, which I recommend everyone watch, because what would happen if like an agroeconomist won anything in political office, and then that speech happens because it's like, and the long-term, coefficient of this, it is so number happy, and I'm just sort of sitting there drooling.
I was expecting him to do more of an Alice Cooper Welcome to My Nightmare tour, where he would just be running around with chainsaws and guillotines and blowtorching things.
So is this like a West Wing situation where a professor is elected president, except instead of a liberal Northeastern Democrat, it's the libertarian version of this?
Yeah.
I don't live in D.C., so I don't know what the West Wing is. Anyways, what I was going to say about Javier Milei is that...
That was on network television for years.
Network television? That sounds exciting.
You're living in the past, man.
That's the best Joe Biden impersonation I've heard you do. Come on, man. No, just to say that if you watch that whole speech, he says over and over and over again that we are out of money. And I was just having a lot of internal pinky high fives.
Our version of that was, we are so out of money.
We're so out of money, man.
Out of money.
Anyways, I remember also that, speaking of growth, Nick, that I believe George Will, either in an interview with us or you, or in a column sometime around 2015-ish, he made the point that there's just a universe of difference between, and I forget the exact numbers that he used, but maybe 2% growth and 4% growth. Let's say it's that.
3%, I think.
Was it 3? Okay. Yeah. And there's something to be said about that is kind of interesting. When growth is small, people get crabby. People start being very zero-sum in their thinking. And I think part of the long politics that we have suffered through and probably made worse, and by we, I mean all of you people, not us, is that kind of crabbiness of a slow growth situation. Anyways,
I
Peter,
think that's very, very true. And if I may, though, Matt, just to complicate that, is in the late 90s when growth was really taking off, and, the 90s was the best decade, I think, for any of our lives, whether we participated in the general expansion or not. But curiously, as growth was really locking in on a big level, that is when the anti-immigration sentiment really hit mainstream. And you have rightly pointed this out again and again, that when Bill Clinton ran for re-election in 1996, being anti-illegal immigration was a cornerstone of his campaign. And yet, you would think that growth would make people more comfortable about newcomers, et cetera, but it didn't quite work that way. I think, broadly speaking, what George Will said was, if the difference between 2% growth and 3% growth is social discord and whatnot. But I think it's actually more complicated than that. But more growth is always better, but it's not a panacea.
It's also true that 96, it wasn't as clear, just the same as 84, but even more so. It wasn't clear that that the boom time was really there. It kind of kicked in and felt kicked in by the late 90s more. That we'd gone through a big divot in the early 90s and people were crabby about it. Okay, Peter, I've already besmirched Washington, D.C., but since you live there, what is your sense of a big undercovered political story of 2023?
So I want to start actually a couple of years ago. You may recall that Democrats and maybe some of the rest of us spent quite a long time debating universal government-provided health care. The term of art was Medicare for all. That's what Bernie Sanders called it, and as did many of his followers. So Medicare for all didn't happen. It wasn't going to happen ever because you know how Katherine's item was, well, we owe all the money. Well, Medicare for all is all the money again. It's like the same amount that we already owe, but like double that, right? And somewhat lost in the debate in the years since, and in particular this year, is that in many of the countries that have universal healthcare systems, those systems are having really, really serious problems. And that's especially true in the United Kingdom, where the NHS, the National Health Service, is just struggling mightily to take care of British citizens and live up to its promise and its obligations. And the big problem is that there just isn't enough capacity in the system. There aren't enough workers. There was like an ambulance, like kind of driver, like something like a strike or quasi-strike for a while that has been resolved. But even still, the system is just wildly oversubscribed. It can't do the thing that it is supposed to do. And And there are incredibly long waits for minor surgeries, but also for really serious stuff like cancer surgery. And there's a bunch of estimates out there that suggest that because of the wait times, a bunch of people are dying who don't need to die. And that's not mostly at this point because of the coronavirus, of COVID, of the pandemic. That is because the system itself is just struggling to take care of people. And this is, again, it's not something that has been totally unnoticed. There have been articles in the New York Times about this. But we spent 4 or 5 years debating Medicare for all and an NHS style system here in the United States. Yes, it would not have been an exact replica of the NHS for those people who want to write in and yell at me. There were some differences between Bernie Sanders' plan and what the UK has. But fundamentally, they were both big government-centric plans in which the government paid for and guaranteed access to coverage for everyone. And in many of the countries that have that, the UK in particular, it's just not working. There is a guarantee, and people are not getting the care they need. People are dying as a result.
I'm old enough to remember when Ezra Klein was but a wee University of California.
The Juice Box Mafia
student.
Cop-out.
Juice Box Mafia, that's true. Eli Lakeism right there. And he first got his name as a college student doing a bloggy tour of the world's healthcare systems. This is back, in the long ramp up to Obamacare. And man, there was so much self-anointed wonkery among the commentariat about healthcare systems. And in fact, you know what? I'm now wow, the flashbacks are starting to really kick in. But at some point, when we were up against passing Obamacare, which stood on a knife's edge, he threw a fit and accused people of wanting the opponents of wanting others to die. And it's just curious that crew seems to have lost interest in the topic. The amount of thumb suckery about comparative healthcare systems and also the efficacy of Obamacare. If you see Democratic politics, and you're going to see this in the run up of the 2024 election, I predict it's not going to be a major feature, but it'll be a differentiator. Joe Biden will say things about the healthcare system that will almost sound like there was never Obamacare. We gotta fix and gotta get more coverage to people and all of this stuff. Nick, we've been at
if
Reason
I may,
Magazine.
can I
Please
ask,
go.
as long as we're having flashbacks, Matt Welch?
Yeah.
Can anybody here name the senator who ultimately was responsible for passing Obamacare and the sweeteners that went to him? I only can recall that he was from Nebraska and that his first name was Ben. It's not Ben Nighthorse Campbell, but there was Ben, and it was like Sakamoto or something like that. Who was the Ben?
Nelson?
Ben Nelson. Thank you.
Nelson.
And
Wow.
he got voted out of office.
Not Ben
or
Sass.
kind of left politics.
You got to keep your Nebraska Bens sorted.
Yeah. No, but it was, Matt, just what brought that to mind was the knife's edge, because it's unbelievably, how unpopular Obamacare was at the moment it got passed, and now it is part of the wallpaper. It's part of the background. I also recommend, I've had the unfortunate experience of actually using some state-based exchanges for healthcare for various people I know. When you go to a state-based healthcare like an Obamacare exchange, it is like entering a fucking mental institution. It is absolutely impossible without
Which, by the
getting
way,
a broker.
Is
I think that's one of the
mandatorily
mandatory
covered.
coverage areas.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it is, how in normal people, when they first join a Discord server, you're like, what is going on here? I'm insane. That's what it is like all the time, everywhere. It's just so bad.
This is always a question I have when I do my taxes or interact with the government in any way is I'm pretty smart. I'm a pretty smart lady. And I think every time I fill out a tax form, what are stupid people out here doing? Surely this is impossible. Do they just not file taxes? Do they just file them wrong? What? I've always just wondered, the stupid tax has to be very, very high.
I, speaking of stupid tax, tried to fill out taxes myself in 1998 when I came back to this country the first time in 8 years, and thinking I'm exactly that. I'm like Katherine Mangu-Ward, who I did not know and who was 2 years old back then. I can do this myself, and I tried really hard, and I couldn't. And so I called up the IRS and said, sorry, I can't figure it out, which is sad.
I would pay so much money for a recording of that call of Matt Welch on the phone with 1998 IRS, which is
voice cracking
before they reformed. Like the phones.
Very, very smart.
Yeah, so smart.
I got in the 80th percentile in the verbal on my ACT.
It was more about the PSAT. It's all downhill after 10th grade.
The
Nick,
PSAT is, I think maybe the blood typing test when you're born is really all the information you need to know, Matt, to predict a life.
I disagree. I dissent. Nick, what is a big undercovered story of 2023 in the field of politics and governance?
Okay, so for me, the big undercovered story, and they kind of link if we get to other topics, it's all going to filter through, but it's that essentially in many economic ways on an individual level, we are back, baby, to pre-pandemic levels or higher in terms of personal consumption. Generational wealth has caught up. So, and to just put a button on that first part, if you look at the amount of wages that people have, adjusted for inflation, et cetera, we're doing better now than we were pre-pandemic. People are buying more shit. Generational wealth has caught up. There was that story by Jean Twenge in the Atlantic earlier this year that said, hey, you know what? Millennials actually are doing as well as Gen X or boomers were. She had been one of the people who had started a concern that millennials were being left behind. And Jeremy Horpedal and other people, other economists have also done this, shown this. So we're back to generational parity, and there are more. And then in September, two economists, Gerald Oughton and David Splinter, showed that income inequality actually, contrary to all of the reports, all of the time, all of the day, income inequality basically has been flat for the past 60 years. So we have been living, I think, the undercovered story economically, and it feeds into politics for a reason I'll get to in a second. But we have been told a story for most of our adult lives and for all of the 21st century that the economy is played out and that everybody is getting a raw deal. Most recently, Glenn Greenwald was nodding, very happily when Tucker Carlson talked about how libertarian economics had destroyed everything in America except for Dollar General stores. This is the world we live in, and it's a fundamentally false picture of reality, and we are constantly underplaying that, and it helps explain why, for me, an undercovered story is why nobody in America is happy or satisfied. The latest Gallup polling data on when they ask, are you satisfied with the U.S., it is 19%. It's a recent low. You have to go back to 2003 after the invasion of Iraq to hit 50%. And that's, to me, is a gigantically undercovered story that proceeds from the incredibly shitty way in which we talk about economic kind of growth and economic opportunity in America.
So two quick follow-ups, Nick. One, are you saying that we should be invading more countries for our happiness? And then two,
absolutely.
How do you,
but,
and this
but
is
easy ones, Matt, not the hard ones. Okay. Canada. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Grenada. Yes.
And this is a subject that is causing a lot of Democratic Party sympathetic journalists to gnash their teeth. If what you say is true, Dr. Gillespie, about the economy, why the disconnect? Why the unhappiness, man?
It's a good question. And I want to go back to a little book that I co-read. I'm not sure I co-wrote it, but I co-read it in galleys, called The Declaration of Independence. And one of it is, Matt, and this is a large issue going back to Lanny Friedlander, which is that people mistake politics for reality. And we have, certainly in the 21st century, for a wide variety of reasons, we can talk when we go to the Dan Carlin hardcore history model, where we talk for 25 hours for each episode. We can talk about this, but we have replaced the meaningful parts of our lives with political struggles. Politics is ugly. When you look at, I mean, for fuck's sake, if the choice is between Donald Trump and Joe Biden again, and before that it had been Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, 19%, we should be patting ourselves in the back that 19% of people are satisfied in America.
Right.
That's the problem, that we're talking about politics rather than what's actually out there and how to create a meaningful life apart from politics.
Distressingly close to false consciousness there, Nick Gillespie.
Yeah, it is.
My nomination or my undercovered story is one that I come back to on occasion, which is that particularly with, to follow up on what Nick was just saying, the way that not just politics, but national politics and national presidential politics fills our consumer brain much more than local and state and politics and governance around us. As that trend has accelerated, and as there has been an acceleration in the big sort, where people move to where they feel more comfortable with their politics, and then also as journalistic institutions in particular have completely withered on the state and local level, the combination of all these things makes people not as aware of the real difference, not on the national level, but on the state and local level between Republican and Democratic governance. It is astonishing. Every time you just click open a map and see where is the lowest unemployment in among the 50 states around, and 80-90% of the lowest unemployment states will be governed predominantly by Republicans. The highest unemployment state will be governed predominantly by Democrats. There are huge differences. There are also differences in the opposite direction, depending on where your own politics are, about stuff like abortion. If you want to go to a place where abortion is basically illegal, it's going to be red states. There is such a huge spread. Republican-run states tend to be right to work. Democratic-run states tend to have pension obligations the size of, Nebraska. It's astonishing, the difference. The school systems are completely different. The way that they responded to COVID, completely different. And that's one of the reasons why the debate between Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis was so disappointing to me, is that it was billed as a great red state versus blue state debate, and they got into some of that. But the differences, I think, are more profound than the debate got, because they kept trying to turn it back into stupid national politics. And there's an actual split in the sense of governance out there, and it's one that is not really covered because people don't really cover state houses and local city councils and whatnot nearly as much. And it's worth thinking about. It's easy to sit around and say Republicans and Democrats are the same. And because basically they do the same thing every December, as we talk about on this podcast, where they all come together and pass a cromnibus nationally. That is true on many levels, but on the state and local level, it is not true. There is a big difference, a big split. And I think it's undercovered.
Matt, if I may, I agree. Thank you. That's actually an incredibly clarifying insight. But it also reminds me that I think it was yesterday or the day before that our good mayor, Eric Adams, was asked what's so great about New York City. And
he
his
said,
response to
you
New
can
York
get a
City,
9/11 here.
Yeah, it's the type of ability where you could wake up in the morning and have planes crash into the World Trade Center. And then in the afternoon, you can go to ice skating at Rockefeller Center. And then maybe get a Nathan's hot dog out of Coney Island. Like, of course, I'm looking for I want international. I want intergalactic politics at this point to get out of the incontrovertible evidence that the people who are running my political life on every level are just insane.
One of these days, I will live in or visit a city or a state that doesn't have major modes of transportation blocked by pro-Hamas sympathizers. This is really
the day is
really
not that day.
Forward to.
We don't have that in DC. We just don't have any way of getting around at all.
You may have to go to Israel for that, Matt.
Yeah, no shit.
Know?
The red line is shut down completely for nearly 2 weeks here in the middle of town, like the parts of it that people use. And they're just like, sorry.
But then they got buses. They got 87 buses It's going to be fine.
I bet you, Kevin, do the three non-Matt Welches on this podcast, do we want to take bets on how quickly Matt Welch is like renting out Carol Markowitz's South Florida garage? I feel like a big shift, Matt, is he couldn't get into Cuba, but he's going to go as close as he can get.
Matt has been talking himself into leaving New York City for at least a year now, if not more.
3. All right, we're veering dangerously, teetering.
We're veetering dangerously.
We're absolutely veering in the direction of hardcore history here, for which I blame Nick Gillespie, as I do most of my problems. So topic number 2 is science. Reason has always been an enthusiastic chronicler of the kinds of liberational technological innovations produced largely and bestly by the private sector. You can go back to some of our earliest issues and you'll see kind of predictions of stuff like smartphones and the World Wide Web. It's pretty awesome. Katherine, you are an actual robot. What is a big undercovered science-based story of 2023?
Please use a robot voice. Please use a robot voice.
You can't tell. This is my robot voice. That's the undercover development, is you no longer know whether I am a robot or a real person. No, that is the undercover development, and this is gonna just go ahead,
Katherine,
Nick.
We've known for a long time that you're not a real person.
Make your huffing sounds now, Nick, because my pick for this one is yet another very covered yet still undercovered topic, which is the creeping of AI into our lives, and particularly the formation of tribal allegiances around different attitudes with respect to AI. This morning, Liz Wolfe dropped into the Reason Slack a nice tweet, I guess, thread from Patrice Friedman, son of David, grandson of Milton.
Baby.
A Nepo
Patrick
baby,
Friedman.
if ever there was one, and yet a delightful fellow. And it's basically a big thread. He describes himself as an OG transhumanist singularitarian. And frankly, yeah, that's accurate. He is. And how mad he is that his movement got big enough that now there are factions and everyone wants to kill each other. Not literally yet, although maybe literally soon, depending on just how much you think it will be okay or not okay if our AIs improve rapidly. This is an incredibly important topic, and people are talking about it, but it's kind of like smarty smart pants people saying dumb things for the most part right now. And I hope that we can evolve this conversation toward smart people saying smart things, and or more importantly, our powerful dumb people saying smart things. That would be the best of all. And I think Patrice Friedman's take is right, which is there are no regulations that will affect the outcome of this debate. So stop looking over there.
But they can speed it up or slow it down, right?
Maybe, but even there, it's we could shift it to China. Maybe that's what regulations can do. If I can underscore your point, Katherine, I guess it's the February issue of the magazine, which isn't out yet. But if you subscribe for under $15 a year, you can get it. Sign up now; you'll get it in the mailbox, or online or whatever. But you have a great essay exactly about this kind of stuff, and. This, again, to go to that question of pessimism versus optimism, I feel like AI is actually, people are starting to become more optimistic about it the longer it's around, and they realize what AI is early on is going to do is help you remember, to follow up on emails and to pay bills and things like that. It's not some kind of, imperial force. It is rather something, it's Kevin Kelly says it's going to give everybody a personal intern. And, that's where it starts, and then it's going to get better. That's the most pessimistic description of AI I've ever heard, actually. Shout out to all of Reason's interns who, of course, are great. But Jesus Christ.
Katherine, can you explain to me, as if I was a dumb person who doesn't understand technology?
Or tax returns.
Or anything, why this is so important?
So I think it's important in the way that the internet was important. That's the easiest way to understand it for people who don't understand it. When the internet was first interneting, people were like, oh, this is interesting. It's kind of like mail. but it's on the computer. And that was like true, but like a trivially small part of what it turned out to be. And I think that when we look at ChatGPT right now, when high school kids have it write their term papers or whatever, we're still at it's kind of like, I can vaguely understand it in the context of things I already understand, but in fact, it's going to change all the things everywhere. And, I think there are many people who would say like, well, that right there on its face is why we should be afraid. That right there is why we need to put the brakes on. This is why it's bad. If it's going to change everything, like humans don't always like that. Patri Friedman says, likewise, to say there are only good outcomes is Pollyanna-ish and silly, but that, the possibility of good futures powered by AI that we actually cannot imagine right now is the most exciting part about it. But the best analog is, right, imagine if we are the people who had like the, dee-oo, bong, 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 like the dial-up internet connections.
Wait, are we not the people who have the dee-oo, bong, bong, bong?
We are the dee-oo, bong, bong, bongs.
I have that for a long time.
Of AI.
I saw them open for craft work
and,
at the 930 Club.
We're at the phase right now where if your mom picks up the phone, it ruins your AI in the other room.
My mother's dead, Catherine.
Well, then that's really going to be a surprise, isn't it?
I want to join her.
I want to kill you. Yeah, I get that a lot.
Nick, what is an undercovered science-based story from 2023?
All right, so this actually kind of corresponds or correlates, I don't know, with Catherine's. And it's a story that came out. I mean, the story came out a couple days ago. So, yes, of course, it's undercovered. But it was a piece in the Wall Street Journal writing up work by Eugene Sterling. And I know that I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a demographer and statistician, sociologist, whatever, wise man who's at the Urban Institute, who's been a leading kind of analyst of Social Security and whatnot. But he pointed out that we have been measuring lifespans incorrectly, and that when you use cohort life expectancy versus period life expectancy, the idea of deaths of despair or the fact that, like, for the past decade, life expectancy has been going down is false. It is wrong. And that basically for the past 100 years at least, if you were born in a given year, let's say you were born in 2022, you're going to live longer than somebody who was born in 2021, who's going to live longer than somebody in 2020 going back. And this is a huge deal for the same reason I think, understanding the actual material world we live in is probably the beginning of wisdom, of how to live a meaningful, purposeful, intentional life. And I think, the idea that life expectancy, rather than declining and hence needing an incredible, massive apparatus of outside control, whether it's done through churches or busybody entities or the government, rather things are going well and we are living longer lives with more, not just longer lives, but lives with more health span in them, which it's called, where we have more good years. My fiance, in a great piece for Proto-Life, which is a publication that was founded by Jane Metcalf, co-founder of Wired, also talked about the growth in hot span, which I am very happy to hear about that. The number of years people are hot is longer. Who knew?
Is that because of global warming?
It might be. I don't know. It's because of general exercise and reduction in bad behavior across the board.
We will soon be rolling out this podcast as a video. And
that's a good thing. And that's a story that we should be foregrounding more and more and more. Because if we're living longer lives, that changes the way we should be talking about, basically everything.
Gotta say, that sounds like a bit of Ron Bailey erasure. I do recall reading at Reason that U.S. life expectancies are going down. Is this new?
Yeah, this is rewriting this information. If you use period life expectancy and we'll have it in the show notes. You can go to the journal piece or Sterling's Substack, which is phenomenal in general. But like, if you use period life expectancy, you catch smaller things, and it looks like, life expectancy started to flatten and then decline a bit about 10 years ago, COVID obviously took it down. If you look at cohort life expectancy, which is a better, measure, for instance, a boy born last year, according to cohort life expectancy, will have 82.2 years of life. According to period life expectancy, 74.8, which is below the pre-pandemic level. Girls born in 2022, cohort life expectancy, 86.5 years. Period life expectancy, 80.2. We are living longer. And I will suggest to people, because we live in a world where who the hell knows how to, adjudicate expert opinions on stuff that we're not really that deeply involved in. Like, do you know, are people living longer in your life? Like, in general, they are. There are, certain tragic exceptions. If you are an IV drug user or something like that, or, whatever. But like, generally speaking, with the exception of my parents, like everybody, I have friends of mine whose parents are still alive, that wouldn't have happened 50 years ago.
All right, Peter, what's a science-based story of 2023? Undercover.
So to follow up on what Nick said, there was a very big approval this year from the FDA, the very first ever life extension drug. It's not on the market yet. There's still some more approvals needed, but it's on the fast track. It has shown some promising initial results, and it is probably going to come to market in a couple of years. But there's a twist. The drug is for dogs. Specifically, it's for very, very large dogs. And as someone who has some really big dogs who have fairly short lifespans, this is very exciting to me. I currently have 2 bull mastiffs. These are the 3rd and 4th bull mastiffs that I have had. For those of you who like numbers, that I currently have about 210 pounds of very large dog in my house. And they're my best buddies, and I would like them to live longer. And thanks to medical science, I may be able to make that happen. I will not have to go the Javier Milei route and clone them at extremely high cost. But like, this is the thing that I actually relate to him most on a personal level about, is he's got 5, I think he may have had 6 at one point, cloned mastiffs. They are clones of his very first mastiff, who was like his best buddy for a long time. He said is like the one creature in the world who has never let him down. And you know what? What if that creature could have lived a little bit longer? How much would you pay for that? This is a great development in our world, and there are more drugs that are in the works that do not have the approvals yet. So big dogs might live longer thanks to science, and I'm all for that.
How's the missus feel about all this, Peter? Have you, when you define them as your best buddies?
They're her best buddies too. They're best friends. They hang out with us all the time. Usually during the day, if we're both working at home, the girl dog works with her in her office, and the boy dog works with me in my office. They're better than any assistants I can imagine.
Can I ask also, is the trade name, are the rumors true that it's being marketed under the name Lazaruff?
The answer is no.
The company is loyal.
And you cannot ask, so stop asking if you can. To quote Javier Milei, afuera is what I have to say about all of that. I can't imagine why that story was undercovered, Peter. I mean, the life extension for bull mastiffs really should be in a lot of front pages.
Other large dogs as well.
Anyways, my nominee for an undercovered science-based story is I love topics that are really hot in the news 10 years ago that everyone just sort of decides to forget, and they still exist. And so in this case, for me, it's fracking. Fracking! I think when I first moved to New York, which is obviously the worst decision I ever made, that was like a mandatory. Every politician had to be more against fracking than the next one. Now it doesn't really come up. I think there was like Sean Lennon songs about why fracking was bad.
He was very anti-fracking, yes.
And and documentaries about all the fire that's going to come out of your faucets and whatnot. So just this week, it came out that we're going to produce more shale oil in this country than ever before, which is not at all what anyone was predicting as recently as just a few months ago. And it's all because of technology. And, some people say, who cares? But this is the difference between 12.5 billion something or others and 13.3 billion something or others is basically the size of the total oil output of Venezuela. OPEC is screwed because we are drilling for shale oil efficiently in this country, and gas prices are going to go down because of it. It's all technology based. It's 40% faster in just 3 years to drill a well. They're increasing production, even though there's 20% fewer oil rigs. That's pretty rapid all around, and all of that fracking is good and not bad for carbon emissions. Just great. I love to see technology and business combine in such a way to make us more independent from the idiocies of authoritarian countries in the Middle East.
Right. Matt, do you look forward to the day when a professional sports team is called the Frackers?
It's they should definitely have that in North Dakota and South Dakota if they don't already.
Or they could in Western Pennsylvania.
They could name one of the lady teams that.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah.
All right.
Although they're usually nondescript like vibes, right? Or abstractions like liberty. Tempo. I'm sure there's a WNBA team called the Tempo.
Not Sparks. It gets right into it.
The Sparks.
All right. Topic number 3 as we are rounding.
Hurdling.
Second base.
Hurdling like
base?
the sweet meteor of death in the 2024 election.
Culture. It's the arts and entertainment we produce and consume. It's the societal habits and trends we develop, if there is, of course, such a thing as society. It's the way we live, Katherine. But Peter, why don't you lead us off? What is an undercovered story that doesn't have anything to do with bull mastiffs that happened in 2023?
Or cloning Baby Yoda is out too.
Well,
no baby Yoda. Okay.
All right. I guess you're going to have
unless
to
it's
go to the other folks first.
Aborting an at-home aborting drug for Baby Yoda is okay.
I want Baby Yoda life extension because 900 years is just not long enough. No. It was so sad when old Yoda died in the original trilogy.
It really didn't take long enough. Yeah.
I'm still I've got tears in my heart right now. So we all know that there has been a lot of upheaval and unrest in Hollywood with the strikes, and also in terms of listeners may not know quite as much about this, but part of what's going on in Hollywood right now is that a lot of things that people thought were going to make money, and in particular, all these big streaming networks, they're not making enough money. They're either losing money or they are just not making enough. Many of them were launched around the pandemic, and the pandemic sort of artificially inflated hopes and subscriber numbers for a little while. And now it looks like, oh wait, we went way too far in on streaming and original productions for streaming shows. And so there is a financial crunch in Hollywood right now. And while we're probably not going to go back to the 1980s, 1990s days where there were only 50 scripted shows or something like that every year, peak TV, this period we have lived through where we have gone from literally there's in 1995, there were only 50 scripted shows being made annually. And then 20 years later, there were well over 500, just this incredible explosion in scripted programming. Well, that number is going to come down. And I think we've already seen that in the past year or so, there have been fewer scripted shows than any period, any year since a decade or something like that. It's still a couple of hundred shows. It's still many more than there used to be in the old broadcast era. But this is a period of fiscal retrenchment. And part of what is going to come of that, part of what is already coming of that, is that what is going to be cut from the budgets of the big studios are the DEI programs in-house in their HR. And so this last summer in July, 5 major high-ranking DEI officers within some of the big studios were either quit or laid off or just left as part of restructuring. And so that's 5 people who are in charge of that stuff, just in terms of kind of headcounts and staffing, who are no longer with the studios. And then in addition, if you are, this is a little bit harder to prove, sort of with numbers and data, but if you are following screenwriters on Twitter, if you are reading industry and trade press news, what you are seeing is that part of this retrenchment financially and part of the reduction in number of shows is the streamers and the networks and everybody who's paying for original content. They're now not looking for niche shows. They are looking for those shows much less. They're looking for shows that have big, broad, popular accessibility to just about everyone. And part of what that means, not only, but part of what that means is that the shows that people were mad at because they felt kind of woke because they were just targeting a kind of micro demographic, those shows are much less likely, not totally impossible to get funded, but they're much less likely to get backing and to be put into production these days. And so the fiscal crunch in Hollywood that has come as partly because of the post-pandemic streaming, it's not quite a collapse, but constriction in terms of people like that business not being as good as people thought it was, and partly as a result of the Fed actually with higher interest rates. Like it's harder to borrow money forever and just sort of assume, well, we're going to get money to fund all these shows. The fiscal crunch in Hollywood is going to lead to at least at the margins, somewhat less woke entertainment industry.
That's interesting. Katherine,
Peter, can I just very quickly ask, do you think it's a good thing that we're going to...
Don't ask if you're just going to do it.
I'm not going to ask then. I'm going to...
No, ask the question, but don't ask permission to ask the question.
Yeah.
Just ask the question.
No, you're not allowed to ask that.
You know what? I believe in permissionless podcasting.
Yeah.
We know.
Is it a good thing, just quickly, is it a good thing or a bad thing that we're moving out of niche markets, which may have been overwhelmingly politically motivated or ideologically motivated and annoying in that sense, back to mass programming?
I think it's both good and bad in some ways. I think Hollywood had become too enamored with projects that didn't really have enough... they didn't have audiences for them. And there was a lot of money spent on stuff that essentially no one or very, very few people were watching. And maybe they were critics' darlings in some cases. And there was a case where it just because you want to do some stuff that gets good reviews and gets awards. But in many cases, they were just spending money on stuff that wasn't going to reach any audience at all. And that's not sustainable. On the other hand, I'm somebody who doesn't always love really mainstream programming that's just sort of that's like designed to meet the average person in the middle. And I think so it's not just woke stuff that's going to go away. It's everything that is targeting a smaller niche, more sort of that is trying to do something a little stranger and a little weirder and not just do the stuff that's like, well, we know this is an easy sell. And so there's an upside and there's a downside here. And I don't think that this is all good or all bad, but it's really interesting that when the money, when the money spigot has been turned off or at least pulled back, this is the stuff that is going, and this is what is being cut from the budgets.
Katherine, what is a culture story that's been undercovered in 2023?
The way that we're just kind of low-key, state by state, either legalizing, decriminalizing, or deprioritizing the prosecution of psilocybin, of shrooms. We're just kind of like casually, quietly being like, hey, maybe shrooms are legal now, in a way that is weird, right? Like, it's weird that it's just like state after state, city after city. It's just kind of like moving its way through the system. And I can't quite figure out, like, this should at the very least be ripe for the I can smell the marijuanas in my city, which is how I know urban decay is occurring crowd. Like, it should also be true like that. We had that one story of the guy on the plane losing his mind and everybody blamed it on shrooms. Maybe there will be more of those.
Wasn't it the case that he wasn't even actually high on shrooms?
No, he had said he had taken them like 2 or 4 days before. He was clearly, it had nothing to do with that.
He was just going through it. But as we all are on some level.
2023.
But I just feel like it's undercovered. I think it might be good that it's undercovered, actually. Like, I kind of don't want to like direct people's attention to this thing that is happening because I'm not sure public opinion has tipped on shrooms in the way that it tipped on cannabis, but I'm happy that these things are going working their way through the system. So, including in my very own Washington, D.C., which is a good place to live. Screw you guys.
Well, it does seem to be the case that public opinion has swayed on medical mushrooms and psilocybin, right? And this is this is partly the story of pot legalization as well, is that the sympathies started to turn when people saw it first as a way to relieve pain. And this is, I think, true, at least to some extent with psilocybin, is that people are seeing this as something that helps people deal with their problems in a way that is basically safe, basically healthy, is better than the alternative of being racked with psychological issues.
I think it's also the medicalization is a big part of it. And also it is very, maybe we travel in circles that use them a lot, but like the past month use of mushrooms or psilocybin in particular is like under 1%. It's a very niche thing. And the people who care about it are really passionate about it, and it's not that disruptive.
It's also just like increased cultural salience, perhaps not coincidentally, in the same group of people that are thinking about like the future of AI and some other stuff. Like the VC bro to shrooms pipeline is real, and those guys do have a disproportionate impact on the culture.
I'm just waiting for the day when an AI can guide my shroom experience and I can have my trip, but there'll be like
literally
an AI
here. That's here.
Is it actually happening already?
You could do that tomorrow. I'm happy to introduce you to the guys.
Wow, I don't even know.
That's already exists.
I'm living in the future here.
Catherine knows. Nick, what's an undercovered culture story of this year?
So for me, the undercovered culture story, and to pull through the theme of optimism, of cultural optimism, I want to foreground the work of Stefan Sagmeister, who is a incredibly well-known and highly regarded graphic designer who's worked with bands like the Rolling Stones and the Talking Heads, artists like Lou Reed and Jay-Z. He put on an exhibit in New York called Now is Better earlier this year, an incredible book version of that, which is about $40. So it's a high ticket book. Paperback is available from Phaidon Press on Amazon and everywhere, called Now is Better. It's got an foreword by Steven Pinker, whose work he uses, as well as that of Human Progress, the Cato Institute website, headed up by Marian Tupy, the co-author of Superabundance, as well as all the Rosling stuff of Our World in Data, basically to show, compared to 50 years ago, compared to 100 years ago, 200 years ago, now is better through artistic representations and a phenomenal personal essay by Sagmeister, who was born in Austria. More importantly, what Sagmeister is doing beyond working on an optimistic cultural plane, his work demands the audience kind of engage it and create the meaning along with him. And I think that is the most interesting large thread of really vibrant culture, certainly over the past year, but also over really the existence of Reason's lifespan. And in that way, it's similar to experiential art, where, when you're looking at art or experiencing art, you have to engage it and create meaning. The viewer does, the patron, the person in the museum, the reader, etc. And I have worked over the past couple of years with people like Agnieszka Palat, who does portraits of robots that have augmented reality in them. People like Dave Ciccarelli, whose Infinity Cube work and project is related to this. In New York, there's a great lived experience called Wonderland Dreams that uses the work of Alexa Mead. This is a big trend in art. It is the next stage in kind of what used to be called fan fiction or participatory culture, where the users of art take control of the material and refashion it, reshape it, misread it, appropriate it, misappropriate, reappropriate things to create meaning in their lives. And Stefan Sagmeister's book is beautiful. I really enjoyed going to his gallery, and there's a interview I did with him in his insane apartment, which is, boy, I hope I'm on the short list when he dies and that comes up for ownership. It's not going to happen soon because we're all living to be 200. But Now is Better is a phenomenal book, and it's part of a large movement in art, which I think is where there is optimism. Politics sucks right now. And, if politics sucks right now, maybe it's good for us to vacate that and move into places and parts of our lives where we can actually create meaningful community, have good conversations, and kind of explore who we are and experience the world that we want to live in. And Now is Better does that.
So building on the politics sucks right now, my pick for undercovered cultural story of 2023, and it might stay with us. I predict that it will in years ahead, which is of 2020, which is to say that the year 2020 was the pig inside our python. It was too big of a thing for all of us to digest and understand. The COVID rupture and then the George Floyd protests and violence that came out of that. That year was crazy. That year was super duper crazy, and the after effects of which are kind of, I think, bigger than our brains are able to completely comprehend. It's affected the way that people work. It's affected where they live. It's affected the public education system in a gigantic way, the higher education, arguably, in a gigantic way. There's all kinds of knock-on effects on our politics. We'd already been living through a long populist movement, not just in the United States, but globally over the last 10 years or so. And when you put this huge rupture, and in populist moments, all elites are going to be tarnished because they're part of corruption and they have squandered their trust and authority. They certainly did that to just an astonishing degree during the management of COVID and other things associated with it. It is, I think, still the biggest kind of knock-on effects of the rest of how we all live. And because we can't quite wrap our heads around it in a big way, it ends up being kind of undercovered. We cover bits of it all the time. Every news story in some ways is a part of it, but the big picture of it is too big for us to comprehend, is my contention. And it's going to stay with us. I mean, right now we have 11 months of a presidential race here where it's just going to be two sides calling each other Nazis and people on the streets going crazy. All that has a knock-on effect, I think, of 2020 and how that impacted an already not great set of trends politically and culturally and socially and even personally.
Matt, do you think there are positive effects of that? Or how do we, by foregrounding it, do we process it better? Or, excuse me, what is to be done with 2020? Do we repress it or do we what?
Positive effects, I think, are it's led directly to the biggest goosing of school choice in our lifetimes over the last just couple of years. Supreme Court decisions, local, state activism on this issue, Corey DeAngelis breaking news alerts on Twitter. It's just remarkable. There has been a mass defection from government-run education, one that I've taken part in, much to the dismay of my bank account. But that is, I think, to the good. I think that there's a recalibration of higher education we see constantly. This month has been pretty eye-opening when it comes to that. And the working at home and the what the hell, I'm going to move to Nashville or Charlottesville or anywhere else from where people lived before. That's going to be, I think, on balance, very interesting and hopefully overall beneficial. But I think that there's a kind of, to use an overused term, but there's a bit of a trauma going on that has not been fully processed. And so, self-knowledge is always the best, Nick, but and there will be good effects politically or like socially or something, and in some public policy. But there's also going to be a lot of bad ones that we're going to be living with for a while, I think. So
the pandemic was Godzilla, right? This giant thing, too big for anybody to really process, incredibly destructive, and also a metaphorical symbol of national trauma.
not just pandemic though too. I mean, it's the summer of the George Floyd and the protests in particular. I mean, there's a collective media nervous
I think
breakdown.
of all of those as like part of the rubber band ball of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Rather than COVID specifically, which is the disease. I think of the pandemic as just like all that crazy stuff that happened starting around early March 2020.
Do you see, I'm curious, Matt, in particular you, but anybody else, do you see the embrace of Hamas by many people on the progressive left? And not simply, the cause of Palestine, but that, the kind of flowering of embrace of Hamas as, legitimate in its slaughter in Israel. Is that the last act of this, or is this a continuation of it? It's always, it's worthwhile, I think, to think about like, okay, are we in the middle of something? Or are we ending it? Because there was so much insanity in 2020. And I think, the discussions of white supremacy, et cetera, were overheated, perhaps understandably in the moment, but were fundamentally wrong about America and the American character. And I think what we see now, at least on the left, a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm a progressive, or I'm not a conservative, but I'm not that. Is that kind of the beginning of a new era, or is it just, oh man, we're partway through this?
First of all, I want to give Nick Gillespie the inaugural annual French Goodbye of the Year award for bringing up Hamas at minute 64 in a podcast. That's pretty great.
In an hour-long podcast.
I think that I want to believe, and so many people want to believe, and keep asking, and I have asked this myself so many times to people, is this it? Have we reached peak woke or peak whatever you don't particularly like? I asked this pretty recently to Greg Lukianoff and Ricky Schlott, the co-authors of The Canceling of the American Mind, because, it sort of seems like, there's finally a kind of a rollback happening, and a lot of donors to universities saying, stop doing this. And so have we seen the peak of the kind of illiberal speech restrictions, because people are saying that, oh my God, we really did go crazy there for 10 years. And they both laughed in my face and said, have you lived through a presidential election year before? And they just basically, hell no, it is not the beginning of the end. It's going to get a lot worse in 2024. And I didn't want to hear that. And I don't want to hear it now, even out of my own mouth. But I'm afraid that is true. There is a derangement that comes from national presidential politics. There's a derangement that's happening with me even as I'm talking right now. I'm even thinking about it. So I wish that it was the case, Nick, but I don't have a great feeling right now. We're recording this a little bit in advance, but there's been a lot of protests in New York City, where you and I both live, over the last couple of days. I think there's going to be dead bodies in those protests and clashes coming soon. I don't want to believe that, but it just looks really nasty all around us, and I don't like the way that's headed at all. And it's only December 2023. I fear it's going to get a lot worse. So sorry to be pessimist at this last podcast of 2023, but that's what you get. So thank you everyone for listening to this special end of year downer of an episode. We will be back again in the new year. I regret to inform you that I will not be on that podcast, which means that you're gonna get segment titles. My God. But we will be with you all throughout 2024, and we will be having as much fun as we possibly can. Go to all of our podcasts, Reason.com podcasts, donate to us, Reason.com donate, see our events, Reason.com events, and so forth. And we'll see you next year.